Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the side session at the 2026 OECD Forum on Due Diligence in the Garment and Footwear Sector. Our session is on making trade work for circularity, and this is a session organized together with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And I myself, my name is Nano Mulder. I am Chief of the International Trade Unit at UNECLAC, a co-organizer of this session. And at this particular session, we will launch a joint study conducted by both regional commissions that is entitled Making Trade Work for Circularity. I would like to inform that this session will last for 1 hour. And during this particular hour, we will have the presenters of the report and also commentators. And I would also like to mention that this session will be recorded, and both the slides and the recording will be made available at the platform of the OECD and also of the Economic Commissions for Latin America and for Europe. If you can move to the next slide, Camilla, just to give you a very brief introduction of what we are expecting today. So we will have in a minute a few opening remarks by Elizabeth Turk, who is the director of the Economic Cooperation and Trade Division of the UNECE. And after her introductory remarks, we will continue with the presentation of the joint study that is available from right now, and later on we will show you a QR link to the particular study, and the presentation will be in charge of Sean Stacey and also Atarv Joshi, both from the World Trade Institute, who have been in charge of conducting this particular study. And a third author, Rodrigo Polanco, unfortunately cannot be with us today. So after the presentation of the study, we will have 3 sets of comments. The first is by Barbara Peñafil, and she is from the Ministry of the Environment in Chile and in charge of policy implementation within the Circular Economy Office of the Ministry of the Environment in Chile. Then the second comments will be made by Chill Berends, and Chill is Policy Officer of the DG Directorate General of the Environment of the European Commission, and we are particularly grateful for Chill to be present in this particular webinar, and also because the European Commission has been the sponsor of this important work. And finally, last but not least, we have with us Beatriz Fernandez, who is a Program Management Officer at the United Nations Environmental Program. And Beatriz is in charge of a very important project that has a lot of things in common with our particular study, which she certainly will comment on as well during her comments. So with that overview, I quickly pass the floor to Elizabeth, and please go ahead for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Huge thanks, Nano, and also from my side, a very warm welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I'll be a little bit repetitive here at the beginning, Nano, but it's also for me to say it's really great pleasure to join on behalf of UNECE, the Economic Commission for Europe, and together with UNECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And as I see sort of like people joining the webinar, it's really, really nice to see such a strong interest in today's session. And I think this also shows us how relevant the topic is and how we are bringing together different communities here for the purpose of this webinar. Now, also joining Nano by thanking the authors of the study, and so that is Rodrigo Polanco, Atarv Joshi, and Sean Stacey from the WTI in Bern, and really, really happy and proud to mention that I'm also a WTI alumni, so it's really nice to see us joining hands in this regard. Finally, I'd also like to thank the European Union for the financial support and for the engagement. It's really thanks to them that we can do this joint work. So this is very much appreciated. And last but not least, a huge thanks to all the experts, the commentators, everybody who has reviewed the study, read it, and provided their insights. Now, as Nana already said, today we are really launching the study with the title making trade work for circularity, improving circularity in second-hand clothing through trade regulation. Now, we are doing this in 2026, and important to mention that the study here, this year's study, is following up an earlier study that we launched in 2024. And that name of that, it was also a joint UNECE and ECLAC report. At that point in time, the name was Reversing Direction in the Used Clothing Crisis, Global, European and Chilean Perspectives. So it's great that we can sort of like go from one step to the next step in these studies and always joining hands with ECLAC. And what is really important, what I'd like to flag is that the two documents, they really relate to each other. In the first study, we kind of like learned and started understanding the scale of the problem of the global second-hand clothing problem. In the second study, the one we are discussing here today, we are picking up on what we've heard from the community, from many regulators, from private sector actors, and that is particularly the need for practical, implementable, and WTO compliant solutions. So this is really how the two documents go hand in hand. And why does all of this matter? I think what we are trying or what we are seeing is that when it comes to the trade in used clothing, we really see two dimensions, two developments coming together. The first one is that global trade in second-hand clothing is many times seen as a success factor. And it is, in many ways it is, because it supports reuse, it creates jobs, it makes clothing more affordable, and it also gives garments and all the natural resources therein a second life. But there is a flip side to the coin, and there's also some concerns. And some concerns really show us that the system is under strain. And what we see is a growing and a rising volume of low quality, short-lived garments that is really driven by largely fast and ultra-fast fashion. What we are seeing is that these garments are moving across borders in ways that many importing countries simply struggle to manage. They can't manage. And what we also see is that what is frequently called trade in second-hand clothing, many times this is actually containing a large amount of textiles waste. Now, what this does is it shifts the environmental burden, the health burden, and the enforcement burden to the countries that are really the ones that are least able to handle. Now, bearing in mind these two dimensions, these two perspectives, or these two developments, what we are trying to do in the study is to pick up on a message and saying that trade is not the problem, but instead trade can be the solution, or at least can be part of the solution, insofar as it makes sure that clothing circulates as a product of value, rather than as waste that is disguised for reuse. Now, there are surely many factors coming into play when we want to achieve that objective, but the study has picked one particular factor or one particular element of the debate, and this is technical regulations. And for those of you who are familiar with the WTO TBT agreement, you can find a definition there, namely that this is a legally binding document that sets out mandatory product characteristics or related processes and production methods, the PPM issue, that goods must comply with to be placed on a market. So our joint study really zooms into these technical regulations, and it shows how such technical regulations can raise the quality of trade of used clothing, how technical regulations can reduce the shipment of low quality or non-usable textiles, and how technical regulations can also encourage better sorting and classification in the exporting countries, and how this can ultimately support environmental, public health, and industrial policy objectives in the importing countries. And importantly, that we do this all while remaining WTO compliant. Now, obviously, the study doesn't look at technical regulations in isolation. It really places it in a much larger ecosystem, an ecosystem where you have traceability standards, where you have digital labeling, where you have questions related to interoperable data exchange, extended producer responsibility, stronger customs procedures, all of this. And I'm really, really proud that here the study also picks up on some of the instruments of UNECE, of our normative machinery, most important, recommendation 46 and 49 of UNECE-ECLAC. And this shows also how this work relates very, very closely to digital product passports and transparency at scale. So I am going to stop here. That already was a lot. I hope I could set out a little bit the relevance of the study, what we are trying to do, how this links to what we did earlier on, and how this also links to UNECE's normative machinery. And once again, huge thanks for everybody who is joining, and particularly also huge thanks to ECLAC for joining hands, because it's always a nice thing for the two regional economic commissions to really work hand in hand and in so far sort of like do the best for our membership. So with this, back to you, Nano, and looking forward to hearing more about the details of this report.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for these great opening remarks. And we will go right next to the presentation of the particular studies. And with this, I pass the floor on to Sean and Atarf for the presentation of 50 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Nano. First of all, I would like to thank the audience for joining in and taking time out and joining this session to listen to the findings of this study. I would also like to thank colleagues from the UN-ECLAC as well as ECE for their valuable contributions on this. And I would also like to thank my fellow panelists for their valuable comments later on in the session. Finally, I would also like to thank my co-authors, Mr. Sean Stacey and Rodrigo Polanco, for contributing to this report. Before I continue with the current crisis, I would set out the background, the problem of the second-hand, the problem of trade in second-hand textiles, and my co-author Sean would then elaborate on the solution part of it. As you can see on your screens, this photo is from a textile waste dump in Chile. This is unfortunately not a very uncommon sight in any developing country. And for those who have visited them, we can see such sites very common. One of the most important reasons why we are undergoing this crisis is the domination of low quality garments that are exported from developed countries to developing countries. The way they end up in developing countries is when clothes are discarded, the turnaround time for purchasing clothes and discarding them has considerably reduced in the past few years. Any textile that is produced reaches the end of its life quite fast. As a result of which, when this waste is collected, sorted, and then sent out, it goes to the developing countries, and the really low quality garments, which cannot be consumed even in those markets, ends up in these landfills. That obviously creates very, very high environmental burden and has obvious health hazards for the communities in these regions. And this is a problem which we are facing at the moment. Camille, if you could go to the next slide, please. In an ideal world, a circular textile market would look something like this. The products that are traded, the textiles that are traded would be designed to be durable and repairable. But what we see is changing consumer attitudes and changing and fast changing fashion trends actually works on the opposite side. The quality of garments goes down, and that's why, as I mentioned before, textiles end up being waste instead of being reused. There should also be a clear distinction between reusable clothing and textile waste. At what point does a cloth, or at what point does a textile piece end up becoming a textile waste, and at what point can it still be reused? That is an important distinction to be made, which is not present at the moment. Another problem in this area is also sorting and classification criteria. All across the world, there are different sorting facilities which sort through tons and tons of textile waste that's collected. However, there is no common criteria that is applicable for the sorting of these textiles. As a result of which, every sorting facility has its own particular criteria, depending on the technology that they have available, depending on the depending on the availability of labor. As a result of which, this is also an area on which work has to be done. Traceability of these products is something that traceability of textile wastes is also something that is important. I know the Commission is working on regulations related to that, but really tracking a textile from the beginning, from its production to the very end of its life cycle is very important in order to know what kind of product composition goes into the textile, what kind of materials it has been made up with, which can be sorted, which can be further recycled. However, as has been said already, international trade actually then facilitates this kind of circularity in the textile markets. As of the moment, it doesn't do it in the way it should, but it does offer a very, very valuable avenue for that. Kamil, if you could go to the next slide. These are some numbers on your screen available for your perusal. In the past 30 years, the trade in used clothing has surged more than 13 times, which means the amount of clothes purchased has increased, as well as the amount of clothes discarded has also increased. Specifically, the quality of the products has declined. Using synthetic and blended fiber also allows the product to be manufactured faster and it reaches the market faster. However, the turnaround time for that particular product also goes down. Consumers tend to discard such products quickly, and that increases the waste that we see over here. As a general trend, we also see that in the second-hand market, the market of second-hand textiles, the notion of value preserving has been replaced by waste. So instead of reusing, consumer attitudes are also changing. So instead of reusing those products, they are simply discarded. So this is the general trend. This is the background on which we have the problem. I now invite Sean to elaborate further on the window of this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Attar. So over the last several years, the concept of circularity has received greater and greater attention in both national and organizational discourse and across subject areas such as sustainability regulation, waste governance, and supply chain transparency. And the report asserts that this growing interest in the topic might represent a potential kind of window of opportunity to pursue circularity in secondhand clothes and in textiles more broadly. Next slide, please. Thank you. So promoting circularity in any market is complicated, particularly where international trade makes up a significant portion of market activity, as is the case with the secondhand clothing market. So in practice, efforts have been made to reduce the volume of textiles that qualify as waste relative to those that might continue to be viable as secondhand clothes using a variety of trade policy tools. However, some of the tools most often used to effectuate these goals in the trade policy arena, and here I'm thinking about things like high tariffs and outright prohibitions on importation, tend to be rather blunt instruments. Bans, for example, raise legal and practical challenges. Tariffs are sometimes circumvented or absorbed without changing market participant behavior. And in both cases, the instrument struggled to target a core problem in this market, which is differentiating reusable garments from low quality textiles before they become waste. Next slide, please. So once we recognize that one of the central challenges in secondhand clothing markets lies in quality differentiation and classification, technical regulations present as a trade policy lever of interest. Technical regulations are governed by a dedicated WTO agreement, the Agreement on Technical Barriers to Trade, otherwise known as the TBT agreement, which sits alongside the GATT as part of the broader network of of WTO disciplines. And according to the TBT, as Elizabeth laid out, a technical regulation is a mandatory rule that lays down product characteristics or their related processes and production methods, including applicable administrative provisions. From a practical standpoint, people encounter technical regulations every day. For example, rules on food labeling, safety standards on all sorts of products, electronics, for example, or environmental requirements for vehicles. Now, unlike tariffs or outright bans, technical regulations are capable, at least in principle, of addressing product quality and characteristics directly. That makes them not a silver bullet, but potentially relevant in a market where the core difficulty is distinguishing reusable garments from low quality textiles. Next slide, please. So obviously the TBT agreement does not prohibit technical regulations, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't have some of these examples that I just discussed. However, it does set out the conditions under which technical regulations may be designed and applied. So the slide provides some of the most noteworthy conditions. Specifically, the TBT agreement requires that technical regulations be non-discriminatory, that they pursue legitimate objectives, and that they avoid being more trade restrictive than necessary. The agreement also places particular emphasis on the use of relevant international standards and on transparency in the creation and management of technical regulations. I know not everybody here is a trade lawyer, so what do we mean by some of these terms, like non-discrimination? In simple terms, a technical regulation should not treat imported products less favorably than like domestic products, nor should it discriminate arbitrarily between imports from different countries on like products. So for example, a rule that imposed quality or labeling requirements only on imported secondhand clothing while exempting domestically collected clothing, this would immediately raise concerns under the TBT and WTO law more generally. By contrast, a regulation that applied the same quality-based criteria regardless of origin would be much easier to defend under WTO law. The trade restrictiveness requirement operates in a similar but distinct way. It does not prevent governments from pursuing environmental or sustainability objectives, which are legitimate objectives according to the TBT agreement, but it does require that the regulatory burden imposed on trade not be needlessly burdensome. Finally, the emphasis on international standards plays a central role. Where relevant standards exist, the TBT agreement requires that technical regulations adhere to those standards. So the big picture takeaway with respect to the TBT as well as other WTO disciplines is that they are not eliminating regulatory space, but they are channeling the focus of valid regulations. Any technical regulation aimed at promoting circularity would need to work within these constraints. Next slide, please. So how might technical regulations be designed in the secondhand clothing market? The report identifies some concrete regulatory components that are at least worthy of consideration. For example, clearer definitions for important categories like used textiles and waste textiles, where waste textiles might be tethered to definitions that designate them as harmful to the environment or to human health. These could serve as the basis for import controls, these differences and distinctions. The report also discusses the establishment of robust digitized labeling requirements, the creation of mechanisms to address unsorted shipments, and the imposition of importer responsibility schemes. These are the kinds of elements that national regulators can work with in practice. At a broader level, however, the significance of these elements exists not only in their discrete national context, but in their potential to support convergence. Over time, repeated use of similar definitions and information requirements can form the basis for shared approaches and eventually for international standards. And as I noted previously, this matters because under the TBT agreement, technical regulations that are aligned with relevant international standards are legally legitimized. Thus, these kind of micro level elements, such as greater precision in definitions, constitute potential building blocks for a more coherent standards-based approach. Next slide, please. Now, it's useful to step back and look at the broader regulatory and market context to ask whether technical regulations are not only legally available, but practically feasible. And the report goes into this. A central part of the answer to that question lies in information infrastructure. Technical regulations in the realm of used textiles rely heavily on definitions, classifications, and labelings. In other words, information. But information-based regulation is only going to work if that information can be generated, exchanged, and verified reliably across borders. This is why the report points to the ongoing work within the UN system, particularly through UNECE-ECLAC on harmonized trade data, traceability, and interoperable digital standards as kind of helping to create the enabling conditions for effective technical regulations. Next slide, please. Even with good definitions, data, and traceability in place, the report emphasizes that economics and capacity operate as very real constraints in secondhand clothing markets. Sorting infrastructure is capital intensive. The profit margins are thin, and advanced sorting technologies are not yet widely available. At the same time, responsibility for residual textile waste often falls disproportionately on importing countries, many of which I should say are relatively less wealthy nations. These realities matter for regulatory design. A technical regulation that raises quality or classification requirements without addressing sorting incentives risks either non-compliance at origin or simply shifting waste downstream. Next slide, please. So this brings us to coordination. Technical regulations on secondhand clothing do not operate in isolation. They interact with customs classification through the harmonized system, waste governance frameworks like the Basel Convention, standardizing bodies, free trade agreements, other multilateral trade instruments, and consumer-facing sustainability rules. The risk that the report highlights is that of fragmentation. If these systems point in different directions, firms will arbitrage the gaps, and even carefully crafted regulations can be undermined in that setting. Conversely, greater alignment across these domains can reinforce regulatory effectiveness by closing loopholes and improving enforceability and reducing incentives for misclassification. So the takeaway is not that coordination is easy, but it's likely necessary. Without it, technical regulations are going to struggle to deliver on circularity goals. Next slide, please. So to sum up, the study shows that technical regulations represent a possible avenue for advancing circularity objectives in the secondhand clothing market, particularly by addressing quality and classification concerns through definitions, information, and standards. At the same time, the report is clear that technical regulations are not a silver bullet or a panacea. Their effectiveness depends on careful design, alignment with international standards, and sensitivity to economic and implementation constraints. The broader takeaway then is that shifting from a market that incentivizes waste displacement toward one that promotes value-preserving circularity requires continued and deliberate engagement with how trade policy can be used to support that transition. With that, I will close and turn it back to Camila and Nano.
Thank you so much, Atarf and Sean, for your excellent presentation of the report. And probably there are multiple questions, and I would like to invite the participants to please write their questions in the chat so that the authors can answer in written form, and also we will have a space at the end to give the floor back to the presenters to respond to the questions, and also to the commentators that we will start right now, starting with Barbara Peñafil Durruti from the Ministry of the Environment of Chile. Barbara, adelante, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Nano, and thank you very much for the invitation to comment on this important report. From Chile's perspective, these publications come at a particularly meaningful moment. It speaks directly to the reality we're facing today, and it does so in a clearly and a practical way. We truly appreciate the work of both regional commissions in providing such a valuable contribution to this discussion. Chile is currently one of the main destinations of second-hand clothing globally and the largest importer in Latin America. Large volumes of used textiles enters our country every year. Many of these garments do find a second life. They are sold in markets, small shops, and on open fairs. They provide affordable clothing for many families, and they support thousands of jobs across the country. But at the same time, a significant share of these flows that not always match our real reuse capacity or the market's needs. And in many cases, they are waste entering under the label of second-hand clothing. This situation has become especially visible in the northern of the country, where illegal textiles accumulation in the desert areas has received an international attention too. But beyond the images, what we are seeing reflects something that's deeper. And the report also talks about it. It's a structural issue linked to global patterns of overproduction, fast and ultra-fast fashion, and the declining of quality garments. As this report clearly highlights, the challenge is not trade itself, that trade can enable circularity, it can extend the life of garments and can reduce the needs for new production. But there are some difficulties. This difficulty arises when quality is not clearly distinguished and when flows include garments that have little or no realistic reuse potential. In those cases, environmental and social pressures tend to fall into the importing countries as Chile. One of the strongest contribution of this report is the focus on quality-based technical regulations as a policy response. And for countries like Chile, this is a crucial insight. Broad bans or trade restrictions are often difficult to apply and in many cases creates other unintended consequences. By contrast, quality-based approaches ground in clear technical criteria, clear definitions, improved sorting practices, and also better traceability can help ensure that cross-border flows consist on garments with real reuse value, rather than materials that quickly become waste. In this way, this protects environmental objectives while recognizing the economic and social value of reuse. This direction is much aligned with the policy path we are working on in Chile and that Chile is following. In 2025, we adopted a circular economy strategy for textiles to 2040. This was developed through a participatory process that brought together public institutions, the private sector, civil society, recyclers, the academia, and also local governments. The strategy is based on a very simple idea that circularity must be built across this entire value chain of textiles, from design and production to trade, consumption, and also in the end of life management. It sets 4 long-term goals. One is reducing textiles overconsumption in the country, increasing circular jobs, improving and recovery and recycling, and also eliminating illegal textile dump sites as the one we see in the north of the country. Implementation of this strategy is organized around 4 pillars: culture, territories, regulation, and also innovation. So these pillars support this long-term systemic change that we think it's needed. So in this framework, improving how textiles imports are governed means increasing transparency, strengthening equality standards, and promoting shared responsibility. It's crucial. So circular systems cannot function if they are overwhelmed by garments that were not designed to last and to be reused. Another important point highlighted by the report is traceability. Without reliable data on consumption, quality, and origin, regulation cannot work effectively. So we need to strengthen costume codes, documentation systems, and coordination between authorities and countries. That's essential for trade really or truly support circular economy goals. Chile has also taken steps to include textiles as a priority product under our extended producer responsibility framework, and the regulatory work is ongoing in this sense. We see EPR as an opportunity not only to reduce environmental impacts, but also to support repair, reuse, and the creation of decent circular jobs on textiles. And finally, this study reminds us of something that's very important. This challenge cannot be solved by importing countries alone. International cooperation is key in this issue. Clear definitions, shared standards, and open dialogue between exporting and importing countries are essential to ensure that global textiles flows support circular economy objectives. So for Chile, this study provides an important reference as we continue to strengthen our policy framework. It offers practical insights and a constructive way forward, one that allows trade to support circularity, environmental protection, and also social well-being. The insight of this study can inform how we design the next steps we are taking in the country, particularly in relation to quality criteria, traceability requirements, and alignment with international practices. So we think this study, this report is very useful, and we invite everyone also to look into it. So thank you very much for the report. Thank you, Nano.
Thank you, Barbara, for this comprehensive view on the strategy of the Chilean government regarding textiles and the textile strategy up to 2040, of which the regulation is one of the 4 key pillars in the implementation. So with that, I would like to turn to the next commentator, Mr. Giel Berends, policy officer from the European Commission, DG Environment. Giel, the floor is yours, and thanks again for all your support to this particular study and this line of work. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, my name is Giel Berends. I work in the European Commission in the waste unit of DG Environment. Many thanks for the invitation to participate in this event and for the drafting of this excellent report. As the co-authors made clear in their presentation, the trade in secondhand clothing at the same time enables reuse and affordability, provides a source of economic revenue, and provides livelihood for a lot of people, but increasingly also shifts low-quality garments and textile waste across borders with serious environmental and social impacts in importing countries. Also within the EU, the textiles and clothing sector as a whole is a significant economic force. It's generating a turnover of 170 billion euros in 2023 and employing 1.3 million people across nearly 200,000 companies. However, as highlighted by the previous speakers, this economic strength is paired with a sizable environmental footprint that we really cannot ignore. Just to give one example, in 2020, textiles ranked third for water and land use impacts in the EU, and fifth for raw materials use and greenhouse gas emissions. And on top of that, we are still facing a waste mountain, 12.6 million tons in 2019, with only around 20% collected separately within the EU. To respond to all these pressures, the EU has launched its strategy for sustainable and circular textiles, which is basically our roadmap to concrete action and for the legislation we intend to deliver. Within this strategy, we try to follow the logic of the value chain. So that means that it covers every stage from product design to waste management and also to waste shipments. And I would like to highlight three concrete examples of initiatives that we took as part of this strategy. Firstly is that we adopted the eco-design for sustainable products regulation. We revised also the Waste Framework Directive and the Waste Shipment Regulation recently. The first one, the new eco-design for sustainable products regulation, is a powerful tool that will ensure that from 2027 onwards, we are introducing performance and information requirements for products in general, but for textiles in particular. These requirements will push the market towards textiles that last longer, can be repaired more easily, and are designed for recycling. The aim is to ensure that these products use less water and less energy, and ultimately to get products that are built to stay in circulation longer and not end up as waste as quickly. We're also looking at the downstream effects, so what happens when the products reach the end of life. In 2022, 85% of textile waste from households in the EU was not separately collected, and instead ended up as mixed household waste from which it can't be reused or recycled anymore. So that's why we revised the Waste Framework Directive, which entered into force in October 2025, which requires now all member states to introduce extended producer responsibility for textiles. This means that producers will take on both the financial and operational responsibility for the products at the end of life. The result of which is better separate collection and importantly, also stronger push towards preventing waste in the first place. Another important element is shaping the textile value chain is what happens when the products leave the EU. Exports of used textiles have tripled over the past decades, from just 550,000 tons in 2000 to almost 1.7 million tons in 2019. So it's quite a substantial increase. And the EU has taken various initiatives to ensure that it does not export its waste challenges abroad. So the new provisions of the Waste Shipment Regulation will tackle illegal shipments by requiring that used textiles collected in the EU undergo professional sorting before they can be exported outside the EU. And thereby we want to make sure that what is exported for reuse is really fit for reuse and is not waste. Without this prior sorting, and the textiles that are collected in EU remain waste, and their shipment is subject to the Waste Shipment Regulation. The Waste Shipment Regulation also sets out new requirements for the export of waste outside the EU, designed to ensure that waste only gets shipped from the EU if there is sufficient guarantee that the waste can be treated in an environmentally sound manner in the countries of destinations. And these rules will also apply to textile waste. So together, the new rules on waste shipments and the Waste Framework Directive will ensure that all textiles collected in the EU undergo sorting to ensure that they are exported, so that ensure that the exported textiles are truly reusable, and that textile waste is only exported to countries that can manage it in an environmentally sound manner. However, the challenges linked to the trade in used textiles and textile waste are not just a European issue. So the EU and its member states are strongly committed to bringing the issue to the agenda of different international fora, such as the Basel Convention. That is why at the last COP of the Basel Convention, so that was COP 17, and that took place last year, the EU and its member states, together with Chile, proposed to include used textiles and textile waste in the work program of the Basel Convention. And we're very happy that now views from parties and observers on challenges and impacts related to this trade have been collected, and that at the next meeting of the Basel Convention, the open-ended working group that will take place in June, we will have detailed discussions on these challenges and impacts amongst parties and observers. To say a bit more on the work on the Basel Convention, at the moment, non-hazardous textile waste is listed in Annex 9 under B3030 or B3035. And as such, no prior written notification and consent is required for the transboundary movements of such waste. We think that in view of the environmental impacts of textile waste, it's worthwhile to assess whether and how such waste should be considered under the Convention. We think that it's important in general that the Basel Convention is able to deal with emerging challenges like textile waste that are strong or closely related to transboundary movement, and where stronger controls could be relevant to address these challenges at a global level. We were also very happy to note that a significant number of parties and many observers already provided their views in writing regarding the challenges and impacts to the Secretariat of the Convention at the end of last year. And in our submission, beyond highlighting many of the important challenges linked to trade, we also highlighted different measures that we think could be considered under the Basel Convention. From our point of view, such approaches could be more or less stringent, ranging from developing a partnership to continue gathering information and best practices, to developing technical guidelines to clarify the distinction between used textiles and textile waste. That was also highlighted by previous speakers, and the environmentally sound management of this waste. But it could also be, for instance, the review of the annexes to the convention to make sure that the shipments become subject to prior informed consent, allowing countries to better control what is imported on their territories. But we could also imagine that other options are brought forward by other parties, and we therefore look forward very much to the discussions at the Basel Convention meeting in June this year, to find the appropriate ways forwards in the context of the Basel Convention. In this report, we really think it improves our understanding of the impacts and the challenges linked to the trade a lot, and it provides very clear and concrete recommendations. So a big thanks to everyone who worked on this report, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Giel, for this excellent overview of the different initiatives of the European Commission to improve circularity of textiles. And I would like to pass the floor to our last commentator, Beatriz Fernandez of UNEP, the UN Environmental Program. Please, Beatriz, the floor is yours. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Nano, and good day to everyone. Thank you to UNECE and ECLAC for the invitation to UNEP to participate, and congratulations on this report. Thank you for presenting the findings. In the next few minutes, what I want to share with you is a perspective that UNEP has around the sustainability and circularity of the textile value chain, and also give some notes that are related to the discussions today that are on the trade of used textiles, which is something that we're also developing. And obviously, I won't repeat a lot of the things that previous speakers have already highlighted, but I wanted just to put in context that the textile industry is one of the largest globally, we're speaking that it's projected to reach 3.3 trillion US dollars in 2030. And this is certainly a sector that plays a key role in industrialization, in trade, in development, and in social value. So it's really an interconnected sector where a lot of the small and medium-sized enterprises become part of the backbone of many economies that depend on this sector. And certainly with this linear system that we have of producing, consuming, and discarding, there's also economic losses associated with it. However, the good news, and this is, I'm referring to a report from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, there are opportunities certainly to transform this sector, and the circular business models in fashion that include repair, reuse, recycling could actually unlock a value of 500 billion US dollars per year by 2030. So we're really thinking of opportunities that transforming this sector could bring not only at the environmental level, but also connecting with social and economic development. And that is why UNEP has acknowledged that the textile sector is an important one worldwide and has formed the Textile Initiative. This initiative is encompassing all the work that is being done by UNEP around this sector, is providing strategic leadership, is encouraging sector-wise collaboration, and the intention is to help in that transition towards a more sustainable and circular value chain. We have different collaborations and we are supporting governments. You may have heard also of the Global Textile Policy Dialogue, and we're very happy to have Barbara on this panel, that Chile has been quite active in this work, and also working with SMEs, with industries. And the intention is to really shift towards business models that are more circular, scaling up industry standards for circularity, eliminating hazardous chemicals, and adopting a life cycle approach that helps us address overconsumption and overproduction. And I'm mentioning this background because I think it touches on the different elements that the panelists have highlighted from country perspective, but also outlining the problematic here. In this approach that UNEP has on the circularity along the value chain, we are also recognizing that trade can and should play a role in this transition. And we have in particular been implementing this project on the circularity of used textiles trade, and it's a project that is funded by the European Union, and I'm very glad to see Hill today on the panel that collaborates with us in this project. And this work is implemented in Kenya, in Pakistan, Tunisia, and Ghana. And the intention of this project is to do extensive research through primary and secondary that helps us understand better the used textile system in these countries and understand better the dynamics, the stakeholders involved, the different elements that are playing into account for the dynamics of this sector. And when I say understanding this system is not necessarily limited, but just to give examples, understanding the material composition, the export and import flows, the trade volumes, the dynamics, how the sorting, the processing is done, the handling, who are the stakeholders that are involved, what is the national and regulatory landscape, are there trade agreements at the regional level, plurilateral level? Are there strategies in the country already in place around this system? And during the development of this project, Pakistan has initiated their national textile policy and also their circular economy policy. There has been also developments in Kenya on the EPR. We have also seen the development of the implementation of the circular economy strategy roadmap in Ghana. So there are different parallel processes that are happening across these 4 countries that are part of this project that are linking up as well with what this project is aiming to understand. And the intention of understanding better this used textiles trade is to propose a framework which is not prescriptive, with the intention that could help countries to better distinguish what is used textiles that can be put back in the economy loop and used textiles that will have to receive a different management. And the intention is that with this proposed framework, countries can adapt it to their national context because there are dynamics that are intricate to their own sector, to their own market, from label preferences to colors to designs to seasons. So those type of particularities could be adopted at the national level. As I mentioned earlier, this is the result of the findings that resulted from the different fieldwork and secondary research conducted in these 4 countries. And we also had 2 global consultations last year involving more countries that also provided inputs to this proposed framework. And in the interest of time, I will mention very briefly the 4 key preliminary findings. All these will be publicly available later this year. So please stay in touch if you want to learn more about these findings. But some of these are actually resonating really well with the report that has been presented today. So there are 4 key findings that have resulted from this work. One is the need to improve classification, transparency, and traceability across the used textiles system. This is to strengthen the classification system, to have clearer distinction between reusable garments, which help the materials to be prepared either for reuse, for repair, for recycling. There's also the second finding about improving the infrastructure for recycling and the capacity of the countries to soundly manage the used textiles in the country, because certainly there's a growing volume of secondhand imports and targeted investment in the sorting, segregation, and recycling facilities. And we're seeing some countries that they're increasing their interest to scale up the solutions for the recycling industry. The third point is on extended producer responsibility, which has been widely mentioned already by the panelists. And this is one of the findings from this project that mentions that EPR schemes are operating both in importing and exporting countries, or at least in some importing countries is becoming one of the objectives that they want to pursue. But there's a need for better alignment and coordination between these EPR systems so that they could be mutually collaborative and supportive of each trading partner. And the 4th preliminary finding, and I'm concluding with this, is the policy coherence, the cooperation and dialogue. And this we have heard in many other instances, but here the important part is that the information gaps and the fragmentation in policy frameworks can actually potentially impact the trade relations between importers and exporters. So there's really a need for continued collaboration and dialogue that help policy formulation to be mutually supportive between exporters and importers. And this is, as I said earlier, these findings have a lot of synergies with the report that has been presented today, from the traceability, from the EPR, and certainly the addition that this report is doing on the regulatory side of the trade of used textiles. We're looking forward to continuing this collaboration, this conversation, and as I said, the project results would be publicly available later in the year. So please stay in touch if you want to learn more about these findings. And thank you again for the opportunity to share these insights today. Back to you, Nano.
Thank you so much, Beatrice, for these important insights of your ongoing projects, and very much looking forward to hear the key results later this year. And with that, we are coming towards the close of this session. I would just like to give the floor back to the presenters with actually one question we have in the chat. And actually the question is from Burko Gosset. Reads as follows: could the reuse versus waste criteria in the EU waste shipment regulation be a criteria to be aligned with global processes? Are there any other approaches on alignment? Sion Attarf, could you maybe respond to that? Or either Gil, please, who would like to take the floor on this question?
No, I'll just a brief comment that intervention from me at this standpoint. So I'm coming at this question obviously from a trade lawyer's perspective, and so the idea of could the reuse and waste criteria in the EU waste shipment regulation be a criteria to be aligned with globally? Yes, theoretically. Now, at the moment, it wouldn't constitute anything binding globally, but as I kind of mentioned in the context of technical regulations, if technical regulations were designed with some of these features in mind, and were universalized through through discourse and discussions, you get a chance for standards to develop, and that would could potentially lead to a policy that was global in that respect. But there are, of course, other points of view that would come from the industry level, and people would know the industry level much better than I, and so there's room for debate in kind of hashing out what an optimal technical regulation might look like.
And just to add on to that, also one important aspect is that the International Standard Organization, I think we cited it in our study, is also working on a definition of what textile waste versus reusable textile looks like. So really, it has to, as Sean mentioned, it has to also come from the industry perspective. What do sorters see, and what can be defined? I think the EU regulation is already a very good start. It's based on a lot of research. So I think it's a very good start. But if it has to be applied globally, I think it also has to come from the industry side. So that's my only addition.
Thank you, Sean in Natarv. So with that, I would like to close this particular session and thank again both the study presenters and the commentators, Barbara, Gil, and Beatrice. Thank you so much for your participation in this particular session. And please keep in touch with UNECLAC and with UNECE on follow-up initiatives in this particular field of work, and together with also the partner organizations present in this particular session. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the OECD Forum. Bye-bye.